think you know Germany. Wars, industry, philosophy, precision engineering, Kant, Brecht, the efficiency of a country that runs on time and reason. But there is another Germany, older than all of that, darker than all of that. A Germany of ancient forests where things moved between the trees and had no name. Of witches' gatherings on mountain peaks before the church called it devil worship. Of folktales so strange, so raw, so unapologetically that the Brothers Grimm sanitized them before they dared to publish them. And even then, they were too much for some. This Germany still exists. Barely. And almost nobody's paying attention. Welcome to Holes in the Forest. I am Ariane Saltorist, folklorist, Gothic fiction scholar, and the publisher of Kaipara books. And I live in Berlin, Germany. I'm a Brazilian. I came from the country where the Caipora and the Boto and Corpo Seco exist. I arrived in a country that the world thinks knows completely, and it's devoid of all mystical things, but you don't know. Today I want to show you the Germany that history buried. The mystical Germany that boredom and asphalt destroyed. The Gothic Germany. The shamanic Germany. The Germany that was inconvenient for an empire, for a republic, for a modern nation that needed to project rationality in order to the world. The Germany of the dark and the old and the disappearing. When people talk about Gothic literature, they think about England and Radcliffe, Horace Walpole, Mary Shelley, Bram Stoker, who was Irish, but you know what I mean. What they don't talk about enough is that Germany had its own Gothic tradition. Older in some ways, rawer in others, and in many ways more honest about what it was doing. They called it the Schauerroman, the shudder novel. The word Schauer matters. It doesn't just mean shudder in the physical sense, it means the specific sensation of encountering something beyond rational, the full body response to the uncanny, the feeling in your spine when the forest goes quiet and something shifts in the dark between the trees. The Germans had a word for that feeling. They built an entire literary tradition around it. The Schauerroman drew directly from folklore, from Volksmärchen, the people's stories, very attained, collected in the late 18th century before the Grimm got their sanitized hands on them. It drew from Schiller's earliest dramas, bandits, secret societies, rebellion against corrupt power, from a culture that, beneath the Enlightenment veneer, had never fully left the forest. And then the literary establishment decided it was trivial. And horror is under the spell until this day. Like it doesn't matter. But it does. Trivial. mass literature, lowbrow, not worthy of serious academic attention. The same move made against Gothic literature everywhere, against folklore everywhere. Declare it primitive, declare it beneath serious studies, let die quietly while the respectable tradition. Kant, Schiller, the moral philosopher. Goethe, the Enlightenment icon, takes up all the oxygen in the room. Except the dark tradition didn't die, it went underground. And it left traces everywhere, including in the work of the writers the establishment was trying to claim for reason. Because underneath the Schauerroman, underneath even the literary tradition, there is something older. The woods. German has some of the oldest continuous forest mythology in Europe. The Germanic tribes that Roman historians described with barely concealed terror, they came from forests so dense, so vast, so resistant to a Roman order that the legions turned back rather than go deeper in. The forest was not backdrop, it was theology. It was where the gods lived, where the dead wandered, where the rules of the human world stopped applying. That relationship with the forest never truly disappeared. I went into Folktales, I went into the Schauerroman, it went into the tradition of Walpurgisnacht, April 30th, the night before May, the night that predates Christianity in Germany by centuries. Walpurgisnacht, the witches' sabbath on the Brocken, the highest peak in northern Germany. Shrouded in fog, unreachable for so much of the year. The night when the boundary between the living world and whatever lies beyond becomes permeable. When witches gather, when the old powers move. Can you tell that I am excited? Because I am. The church renamed it Saint Walpurgis, specifically to suppress what was already happening. To Christianize a night that was never Christian. Sounds familiar? To put a saint's name over something far older, far less manageable. It didn't work. Not completely. Walpurgisnacht survived. The Brocken survived. The tradition of gathering on that night, even now, even in modern Germany, survived. Because some things are older than the institutions that try to destroy them. The forest remembers even when the people forget. No, the establishment wanted to claim the German literary tradition for reason, for order, for enlightenment, respectability. And there was Goethe. Johann Wolfgang von Goethe, the most celebrated writer in the German canon. The one they put on the currency. The one whose name is on the institutes that teach German language and culture around the world. The marble statue of German high culture. Who threw a barbed knife into a river and read where it landed as an oracle about his fate. Who cancelled journeys because of omens, who dreamed himself on horseback in a grey coat decorated with gold, and years later found himself riding that exact road wearing exactly those clothes without having plane either. Who experienced the night Friedrich Schiller died as a violent disturbance in his own body before he received the news, who described writing poetry in states resembling trance, as if the words arrived from somewhere else, fully formed without conscious effort, who in his youth became obsessed with alchemy, with Paracelsus, with the mystical medicine traditions that blended chemistry and spirituality and magic into something that Enlightenment had not yet separated. Did Goethe believed in the supernatural? I will not claim, certainly. Nobody can. The intellectuals who insist he was purely curious about natural phenomena, they weren't there. The Rosicrucians who claim him as one of their own, they weren't there either. Okay, these people must be working with records. But there is always interpretation. People who believe in order and reason and enlightenment will never accept that Goethe was an occultist. And the people who believe in the spiritual world and everything that lies beyond our physical life, that there is something there, they will never accept that. Because why not? He could have been an occultist. Why not? What I will say is this. Goethe lived in a time when religion and science and magic and had not yet been fully separated in people's bodies and minds and cultures. In their daily lives. The 19th century was saturated with occultists. We know that. Some were charlatans, but some people really did believe. With Freemasons, with people who moved between reason and mystery as naturally as breathing. To claim Goethe was immune to all of that, to claim certainty about what was in his heart, it's not scholarship, it's wishful thinking, dressed as scholarship. A Mongolian Tuvan shaman named Gazan Tashinak said in 2008 Goethe wrote good poems, not as a writer, but as a shaman. I find that more honest than most academic papers about Goethe. And then there was Faust, the work Goethe spent ages writing, the pact with the devil as central metaphor of his life's work. Not a youthful experiment, not a minor text, the one the German canon considers one of its greatest achievements. And in Faust Part 1, right there in the most celebrated work in German language, Goethe places his protagonist on the Brocken, on Walpurgis Nacht, among the witches. He didn't have to do that. He chose to do that. The men that establishment claimed for reason put the witches' sabbath at the center of the German canon permanently, undeniably. He carried the old dark Germany forward it. He protected it. Inside of the very text they were using to represent German civilization to the world. Whether he believed it literally or felt it as a deeper truth, he knew what the light meant. And he refused to pretend it didn't exist. But here's what troubles me. The folktales are dying. Not violently, quietly. The way things die on, nobody notices they're leaving. I don't think this is only a German problem. I think this is all an all-round problem that children do not grow up with the stories, with the oral tradition that permeates a country, a culture, an ancestral truth. But here they do not learn what Schauer really means. That full body response to the uncanny, to the forest, to the thing that moves in the dark between the trees. The cities here, they do not learn that their forest were once full of things that had no name. I'm a Brazilian. I came from a country with its own dying folklore, its own creatures disappearing as the cities grow louder. I know what it looks like. You know, when a culture loses its dark imagination, it's worse here than that. It is. I know what is lost when the old stories stop being told. Because I grew up listening to them. But I don't know about the children of today having the same experience. What is lost is not entertainment. What is lost is a way of knowing, a way of being in the world that makes room for mystery, for the unexplained, for forests at the edge of the village where something moves between the trees and you don't immediately reach for a rational explanation. Germany had that. Germany still has remnants of it in the Black Forest, on the Brocken, in the stories that few people still carry, and the dialects of villages that the modern world hasn't fully reached yet, thankfully. The remnants are fragile, and the clock is ticking. Let me leave you with a story, not mine, Goethe's. A father is riding through the night, his sick child in his arm. The wind is up, the forest is dark, and the child begins to cry. Wer reitet so spät durch Nacht und Wind? Es ist ein Vater mit seinem Kind. Er hat den Knaben wohl in dem Arm, er fasst ihn sicher, er hält ihn warm. Mein Sohn, was birgst du so bang dein Gesicht? Siehst du, Vater, den Erlkönig nicht? Den Erlkönig mit Krone und Schweif? Mein Sohn, es ist ein Nebelstreif. So liebes Kind, komm gern zu mir, gar schöne Spiele spiel ich mit dir. Manch bunte Blumen sind in dem Strand, meine Mutter hat manch Güldengewand. Mein Vater, hörest du nicht, was Erlenkönig mir leise verspricht? Sei ruhig, bleib ruhig, mein Kind, in dürren Blätter säuselt der Wind. Willst du, feiner Knabe, du mit mir gehen? Meine Töchter sollen dich warten schön. Meine Töchter führen den natürlichen Rhein und wiegen und tanzen und singen dich ein. Mein Vater, und siehst du nicht dort Erlkönigs Töchter am düsteren Ort? Mein Sohn, ich sehe es genau, es scheinen die alten Weiden so grau. Ich liebe dich, mich reizt deine schöne Gestalt. Dumm bist du nicht willig, so brauch ich Gewalt. Mein Vater, jetzt fasst er mich an. Ey, König hat mir Leid getan. Dem Vater grausit's, er reitet geschwind, er hält in Armen das ächzende Kind, erreicht den Hof mit Mühe und Not, in seinen Armen das Kind war tot. The poem is 200 years old, and it's pure German Gothic. It is the forest, ancient and patient and utterly indifferent to the father's rationalism. It's only mist, only the leaves reaching in and taking what it wants. The father never saw the elf king, but the child did. This is what happens when a culture stops listening to its own dark traditions. The adults see only mist, only dry leaves, only rational explanation. And something reaches in anyway. And here, the other Germany is still here. In the forest, in the old stories, in the night of April 30th, when the fog rolls over the Brocken and something older than Christianity stirs in the dark. We indeed lost something when we rode off the witches and spirits of the woods. I am listening. And if you are too, subscribe. There are more holes to walk through, and the forest goes much deeper